looks a little bit unrelated. Officially, the only relationship is that I should mention this, and the topic came to mind while looking at demo slides. But of course, then it turns out that the relationships are there, are important, and they have something to do with my talk tomorrow. I'll say something about this. Yes, I just dropped this distinction, which is undeniable because I'm making it and it's intelligible. There's nothing much more. The point is that whether it has an interesting role to play in the explanation of anything, I'll say quite a bit about that tomorrow. But today too, I raised a few points that I liked and that I thought could be expressed within this distinction. Well, at least taking this distinction as a starting point. The distinction between the truth conditions. Some people talk these debates about truth conditions, but there are two very different senses of truth conditions, and mostly the debate, the contextualist considerations focus on the truth conditions of the utterance, right? And naturally so, because they're interested in communication, and communication is made of sentences in context, i.e. utterances. I'm not bothering about that distinction, which is on top of everything. But anyway, so that's the sense in which contents have truth conditions, right? Yeah, contents, unless in a standard view, contents are world neutral, for Kaplan even time neutral, so they have conditions of truth, right? And unless you know how the actual world is, you can't tell whether it's actually true or not. So it's a relationship between possible worlds and truth values. It's, well, yeah, you know what that relationship is. It's not just a relationship, it's a function, and it's called an intention. But okay, that's not what we should be. Well, I mean, you can be interested in anything you want to. But another interesting, let's put it mildly, another interesting option is what we are exploring on video semantics, which is this, right? It's a triplet relationship between truth values, in the case of extensions, right? Context and possible worlds. The contexts are there. Right? And the contexts are there is important because semantics in this sense, unlike in the other sense, is a study of meaning, and so meanings are context sensitive. The first conception of truth conditions loses a lot of meaning, right? Yeah, it's a perfectly legitimate everyday sense of meaning, content, pretty much. But you lose a lot. You get content indistinguishable sentences that are surely not semantically on a par. Right? Well, content is indistinguishable utterance. So I am hungry, uttered by me now, and Stefano is hungry. They have the same concept, the same content, so they have the same truth conditions in the first sense. Of course, they have dramatically different truth conditions in the first sense, because, for example, not. Okay, and I leave it there. Obviously, the first one has no role, no place for character, because that's too late. Direct context is not there, and character will play a role in what I'm talking about, commenting on Emma, and tomorrow too. Final little bit, yesterday and today I'm saying, oh, but semantics, is a study of meaning, and the first bit already lost all the meaning, because meaning is character. Okay, no, it's not really. I think meaning is much more than character. There are meaningful expressions that have a very boring character, but I just leave them on the side to make matters simple. So when I say meaning, I mean truth conditional meaning, and that, I think, is character. Okay. Right. It's a sort of no way back kind of that Frege had, right? Once you get the content, you have no way back to the logic, because you got the content with me and my hunger, and you do not know whether it's a logic of I, it's a logic of proper name, indeed a boring logic, and all that stuff. Right. Okay. Now, yes, this is the bit that I wanted to talk about. I completely agree with what Emma said. So I will add a couple of comments on this. So to make it very rough, Emma made it much more precise, but the idea is, in the big picture, if you want to put it in the picture, some sounds to meanings, in the very fat sense of meaning. Intentions matter, there's no question about that. There's lots of intentions going on. Some terms seem to be particularly interested in intentions, perhaps all of them are, that's fine, right? But there's different ways of putting intentions in, and some may be semantically interesting, semantically dramatic. Some may, for example, spell trouble for a minimalist. Some may spell trouble for other things. And you got all the problems. The point, indisputable, is a lot of these many of these problems, and in particular, from Emma's point of view, the problems for minimalism can be avoided while recognizing some sort of role for intentions by, in the following way, fixing the relevant content may depend on intention-based processes, but these do not form part of the content. Right? Yeah. Okay. So that's already something. The intentions are not part of the content. Now, I added a silly thing because I couldn't come up with anything else, but there's something that's more interesting that I will say afterwards. Let me start with the silly thing. It's completely negotiable. But I'm saying, hyperbole. It could even be that intentions could form part of the content. Well, they surely do form part of the content, for example, when I'm talking about my intentions. Right? Okay, that's harmless. But we're talking about the intentions that do something well, and what I'm thinking is well, I anticipate one way of keeping intentions out of content is to put them somehow in the character, and I will talk about this. This is the topic of what I'm going to talk about. Right? Okay, so the character of an expression is intention-based. The referent of blah is ... intention of ... somehow. That could happen, and of course you could still end up with just the object in the content. No problem there. Neo-Freudians like to put something very close to the descriptive content encoded in character into the proposition expressed, right? And then they give it over. Suppose that this is a plausible story. In that case, you could even have intentions as part of the sense of an expression, i.e. as part of the content of the expression. Of course, you could still be ignorant unless you can define the intentions about the object, the referent, the truth value. But you have transmissions of thoughts without identification of the intention. Of course, you don't proceed to the truth value in the Freudian case, whereas in our case you don't even proceed to the identification of the content. Fine, but perhaps even this could, in principle, be harnessed for at least certain forms of stability that a minimalist might be interested in. Okay, that was the little silly thing aside, and we can talk about that, and you might tell me if you find it bothersome or not. It shouldn't not be due I can tell you the first 10 reasons, right? Because I don't think that character enters the content, because I don't think that's the right character, and so on. Okay, so what I want to mention now is something that we were talking about outside. Okay, no, what I'm saying here now is not Emma's point. This is my point when I'm, I want to stay neutral when it comes to minimalism and that stuff. And then I say things like, you can have as much contextual fluff in the semantics as you want, the intentions that are vague, that are context-dependent, and so on. They might be a problem for communication. They might be a problem for minimalism. I don't think they are because of the other considerations, but it might be. But the point is, at least a semantics that does what semantics is supposed to do, relationship between meanings, can be done by keeping the fluff constant. Right? That's another thing, right, that I keep mentioning. Yes, that's fine. You can relegate all the fluff that you want in the context as long as it stays equally fluffy. If you don't add or subtract fluff between premises and conclusion, then everything works exactly the way it should. It does a little bit that isolating the thing from the noise, right? The thing, in my case, however, being not psychological reality, like you were suggesting, interesting, but the logical intuition. You do that, right? Unless, of course, you find an expression that is fluff sensitive, then you start being interested. So let me tell you another thing where I'm gonna just piss outside of the vase, of the vase, because it's not my topic at all. But vagueness, in and of itself, is not a particularly interesting semantic problem. right? Some terms are vague, fine, but if the vagueness is transmitted from the premises to the conclusion, if your specification is roughly in that area and the conclusion is happy with roughly that area, there's nothing that needs to be added. Unfortunately, something needs to be added because, by bad luck, in English we do have expressions that are sensitive to vagueness. Definitely, for example, in the philosophical sense of the term. Okay? So if you have that, then the story changes and then it becomes not only metaphysical, but a scientific problem. So perhaps you have two, but that's a linguistic question. Do we have expressions whose meaning is devoted to modulating this? Okay. Anyway, right. Before proceeding to the next bit, which is that, which was my favorite bit of paper. But I wanted to add the little bit that you were talking about outside, and it's ways of keeping things out of content. And the two ways, so I haven't talked about the pre-semantics, and I cheated a bit because I made it into character. So you even have this option, right? The character-based appeals to intentions, well, at least don't get intentions in the content if you want to do that. They do that, right? So yes, the pre-semantic appeals to intentions, I find it absolutely natural, right? And I want to mention two things. One is the topic of my lecture tomorrow, is the identification of the expression in the semantically relevant sense of the term. You gotta know what expressions you want to evaluate. That's a pre-semantic task, almost by definition. I can say more than that. And in that field, intentions seem to me to matter enormously. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I don't find it anything particularly scandalous in allowing that intentions determine the expression that the speaker is producing. And I wanted to push, and that's the topic that we were discussing, right? I wanted to push the same thing about context, right? I want to avoid the idea of, I just occurred to me when I was in the bathroom, because that's a place where I think about Heidegger. Heidegger has the metaphor of being thrown into the world, right? That's an existential metaphor. But the classic view, and it's a little bit Kaplan's view, is Heideggerian in this sense, right? I'm thrown in this context, and damn it, until I start moving furniture around, that's the context I'm stuck in. No, right? Because we talk from imagination, right? I wake up and the first thing you hear me is a dream, and you understand that the context is not the physical context, I call it the intended context. I'm very liberal. And so, of course, I really think that I can wake up out of the blue and start saying, something with indexicals that refer to the world of the context. Maybe I'm being a little bit too liberal here. Maybe there should be some constraints about reasonable intentions. Perhaps. My very, very close friends usually pick up the most bizarre imagined context that I have in mind. Right, but so that would be the pre-semantics applied to context. And there could be a lot of intention. For example, just to make the thing apparent, it could be the case that an object is candidate for the role of demonstratum, if and only if I intend it to be such. Right? Well, in the case of demonstratives, that's where shaping context seems to be pretty easy. Right? Usually we do it gesturally, without having to move things. I could move things, right? I could have the classic demonstration stage and put things on top of it, but without carrying the stage around and do this. And sometimes my intention seems to be enough, and you kind of pick it up, right? Gazing and manifesting my intention is good for communication. But all of this, I put it at the level of shaping the context. The intended context is one in which the microphone, imagine, is the object that plays the role of demonstratum number one. Let's put it like that. All of this could well be intentional. I think that it's all cognitive science, I suppose, the things that I'm focusing on. But something very mindy and something very fluffy, very fluffy. But it should be fun. Okay. Then what happens? What happens is that the character is very, very simple. It's the function that gets me from the demonstratum of the context to the object itself. It's the function on the demonstratum, right? And then you get the content and then everything is done. Fine. There's an alternative, And the alternative, I mention it because, well, I mentioned it before, the character alternative, but I also want to mention it because it is an indirect clarification of the idea of pre-semantics. So pre-semantic is not magic. It's not like, oh, you don't like intentions bother you, so what you do, you make up a word, right, a special niche where you can relegate the intentions, close it, and then say, oh, it's pre-semantic, right? I'm doing the real semantics. Right? The idea is not that. Okay. So, here is another way of keeping intentions at least out of content, but this time not out of semantics, and it's to put them in the character. Okay? So the character would now be one that has an argument, a different kind of context, an inert context. Right? It's not a context with the demonstration stage of the thing to the top. It's a flat context with all things equal, and then the character rule tells me the character of that is the function that gets you from contextual possible world and a speaker to the object that the speaker intends as salient, as important in that context. Right? Also, this puts the intentions in the character. I don't like it, and I've written against this, so let me tell you what the idea is. You might dislike the argument, but at least you see why I don't think the distinction between pre-semantics and genuine semantics is an arbitrary distinction. So my point was with demonstrations, not with intentions, but with intentions. It works equally well. And the idea is that stuff that is in the character, at least in a certain understanding of character, which seems to be needed. Okay, anyway, I just say, stuff that is in the character plays a logical role. It's there and the semantics isn't. Right? So if your character always selects an intended object, right, it's going to be true in every context that the selected object the object selected by that, if any, is an intended object. By which it follows that every time there is a genuine, if you want to put the if any, right? Every time you use the term, every time the term that is evaluated at the context is going to be evaluated at the context in which there is a directing intention. Okay. If this is the case, it follows that that is blue, that is a Christian Democrat, whatever you want to, is going to entail that there are intention-capable agents, it's going to be that intentions have been mounted, and this sort of thing. This is bad. I mean, don't ask me why. If you think that's it's a good logical inference, it's very interesting, but it's going to be bizarre logic. Right? It's going to be a very, very strange logic. So that's the reason. Again, as usual, what bottoms out or something is logical intuitions or facts about logic. I assume my intuitions are right. Of course, I would retract that particular argument if you persuade me that the logic has some certain features that I should welcome. Okay, fine. But otherwise, we want to preserve this fact. And if we want to preserve this fact, and of course we don't want to put the intentions all the way up in the content conditions, then we surely want to put them out of anything that smells of semantics. And at that point, I can coin a word and I can call it pre-semantics in relevant. Okay, tomorrow I'll run the same thing without the logic on words, but tomorrow it's much more easy going because it's going to be about things that sound a bit like a word, but they aren't, the intention matter, you know, malapropisms, that kind of stuff. Okay, that's all I wanted to say about that. And I think that's all I want to say because the second bit I wrote about Emma's last part, and I got nothing. Because now that I understand it better, I got nothing because, right, just in case. Well, I call it an Old Testament. I don't mean to say it with disrespect. It bothered me all the time. I think Wittgenstein was bothered by it. Well, he's got the red all over, and so it can be green all over, that sort of stuff, right? Yeah, okay, but so it's big. There's the bachelor issue also. I agree with you, though, the division between some right. Anyway, yeah, just random thoughts on things that you mentioned, the tale of generative semantics. The tale of generative semantics is a slightly different variation on the kill example, right? I almost killed him. It can mean, these people say, three things, right? I almost caused him to die, right? But perhaps the gun is fired. I caused him to almost die, which means I wounded him. and there could be another one. But anyway, two is enough. Ooh, so there's an ambiguity. It's a structural ambiguity, it doesn't seem to be a lexical ambiguity. So you got to have lexical decomposition in the syntax, because otherwise the semantic you can't see it. Oh, well, of course, this was, we've been laughing about this idea for the last 50 years, but it was an idea. Okay, that's not how you want to do it. Absolutely right. Still, you want some sort of things there associated with the lexicon, with words. Many of them always smelt to me very semantically and too semantically to be there in the lexicon. They give you too much, right? They start telling you about dogs being furry and with a tail and four-legged, and some of them are expensive. It's like, oh, wait a minute, now we're getting into the encyclopedia. So now, yes, what I'm clarifying is pretty much to me a little bit the reason why a thing called theta theory is part of the syntax. And the reason is the lexicon should contain those features that, you know, by accident perhaps, I don't know, I have to think about this, by accident are borrowed from features of the object, but perhaps even not. It would be interesting to find grammatical features that are not really properties of the object. Right? And we were talking even animate. Yeah, okay, I know that dogs are animate things, but the grammatical animate perhaps is not exactly the same as the semantic animate. And in this case, those are things that the lexicon needs to specify, just as the lexicon specifies that something is a transitive verb, for example, I suppose. Right? It just tells you the mode of composition. So great. Great. This might give something out, right? Will give some results of logic. Fine. The concept itself is a simple. All fine with that. So yeah, no, I got nothing else to add. Just just to tell you, I like this. I think anything is pretty much okay. Right. Yes, so here too, right, I would like to go a bit case by case. Is red then colored analytic? Well, surely the consideration that I was making now make no difference, right? If anything, if John kicked a dog, then John kicked an animate being, if anything, in the semantic interpretation that anyway I don't like too much, that might turn out to be an analytic sentence. This one I am very suspicious, but I just leave it there as a topic of discussion if anybody wants to. And what are Higginbotham's grammatical effects? Well, they are exactly the things that I finally got from the word representation. I didn't pick out when reading the slides. They are the good thing, the thing that really made me happy. And I think that's it. All right, okay, let me hack this. Okay. Finished off, ended the second. So the first big little comment that I had was on character, semantics, where to put the intentions. I would put them in the semantics as many as you want afterwards. Then this bit where I said, hooray for what I said. Now I want to say something in any way about real on-the-page composition, right? And nothing, I got nothing there, but I just mentioning. The puzzle of morphology, from the obviously structured to the obviously unstructured, right? So the obviously structured, I say a sentence. There's many words with roles and cat, I take it to be obviously unstructured, right? There's no the occurrence of at in cat is purely accidental, like cat interprotonic and all that thing, right? And then there's in between, and in between I find it a little bit interesting for reasons that have nothing to do with. And here they are, right? Well, Burrari 40, I'm not so sure. Dog catcher, yeah, interesting. Boston, Massachusetts is the one that interests me most, right? Because Scott Thompson is the only one that I know wrote about this, and he wrote things that are absolutely not what I want to say. Oh, yeah, he wrote exactly, I think, if I remember well, enough, he wrote exactly a character-based account. Right? He says that Boston, Massachusetts is something that gives you, it's part of the character of Boston, Massachusetts, that it is a city in Massachusetts. Whereas I took this to be a semantically simple term whose complexity, because the complexity is there, there's a comma in between, whose complexity is purely accounted at the pre-semantic level. Right? So when you name a city, there are some conventions, social conventions, and if the city is not in Massachusetts, you do not put Massachusetts after the city. It's just a pre-semantic reason for choosing that name. Once you get the name, it's a name. Right? And you can move the city out of Massachusetts if you want. Okay, so yes, right, apparent syntactic lexical complexity that I don't think translates into semantic complexity. A case-by-case study. Mere non-transparency, encoded false etymology, and all of that stuff. Yeah, these are all the things that I put in the pre-semantics. I even put the evening connotation into the pre-semantic. It's not semantic. Very competent speakers use Hesperus, refer to, I don't know, to Venus, if competent. You gotta tell them the Babylonian story if you want them to be read. That's the story. Oh, right, now I got something. I got the root, right? The Latin root for the evening, and it's great. That's the story. So that's a pre-semantic story. It's got a lot of cognitive value, of course, but it's pre-semantic. It's got nothing to do with meaning. Right? Words come with a lot of baggage. Their sound, their history, the fact that this word has a root that means the evening surely matters. Yeah, but it doesn't matter because it has a Freudian sense. It doesn't matter even because it has an interesting character, like some indexicalists about proper names claim. Right? There's the problem of false etymology, where the pre-semantic leads you astray. Right? The Holy Roman Empire wasn't holy, it wasn't Roman. Okay, so that's something that I want to throw out. It's got to do with names, and that's it.
I've got a question about the property red. So you believe that the word red makes the same contribution in every sentence in which it appears, which is a really general relation between an object and the property of redness. So a red car is red in one way, and a red pen is red in another way. A red pen is red because it writes red, but it has something to do with redness somehow. But I can see that my red pen is not red, and this is not a contradiction somehow. I can say it plainly, but how would you explain it if the contribution of red is the same, and if it is the same word, it seems a bit strange. Or also I can say, my pen is red, my car is red, but my pen is not colored. Because my pen is red because it writes red, but is it not colored? So is it transparent? So I think that red then colored is not analytic. And a second question, what do you think about phrases like red tape, for instance, which doesn't bear anything with redness?
Yeah. I mean, okay, so maybe I'll take the second point first. So I think that it's not right that the word red makes the same contribution absolutely everywhere it occurs. So there are definitely cases like I would take red tape to become slightly idiomatic, but it's, red will appear in some sorts of constructions where it's doing something other than picking up a property of red. I think that's not the case. So the problematic cases are this, that you can be read in lots of different kinds of ways, and you can be read in lots of different kinds of ways. That means that when something is read in one particular way, it's not read in some other kinds of ways. So the pen that writes in red ink is read because it writes in red ink, but it's not read if it's transparent. So what do you say about those kinds of cases? And I think the minimalist just really has to kind of bite the bullet there and say, look, if it's read in some kind of way, if it writes in red ink, and that counts as being read, then that really is read. So when you say this pen is not read when it writes in red ink, you're actually saying something literally false. And we miss that most of the time because most of the time what we're focusing on is the communicated content, and I know exactly what you mean when you say this pen is not red, when you're holding it up and we're trying to find a pen that looks red to put it in our artist composition next to Piers Green Leaves. We know what you're trying to say. You're trying to say that this pen isn't red on the surface. And most of the time that's what we run with. We run with that level of conversational content that we're interested in. But it's always open to me as an annoying minimal semanticist who's listening to you say this pen is red, and I've just watched you write a sentence in red, and you go, oh, hang on, that pen is red, it writes in red. It's red in some way or other, and that's what you say.
Okay, so you think that my pen is red and is not red is a contradiction?
I think it's false.
Even if it writes red and is it not red color, is it false?
Okay. Yeah.
It should be true.
Yeah. So it's going to come out that if you're red in any way whatsoever, then you're red. To be non-red, you have to be red in no way whatsoever. So any sentence that denies that, yeah, that's either false or correct.
Can I ask a bunch of short questions? So, how do you distinguish lexical? How do you distinguish lexical features from world knowledge? How do you put, like, I don't think you want to say, so this is the second one now. I don't think you want to say that you possess the meaning if you know the OLS lexical items, or like the lexical features, I don't know how you call them. Because that's what you said, the meaning postulate you were saying. So what do you make of terms that don't really refer to any natural kinds, like democracy? And how do you learn these lexical features, these OLS lexical things? Thanks.
Okay, so how do I distinguish lexical features from world knowledge? I mean, that is the appeal to Higginbotham that we saw, something gets into the lexicon, gets into the syntactic features of an expression just in case it makes a syntactic difference. So something like easy to versus eager to, that makes a difference to the readings that you can get out of those sentences. You get an argument placed in a different position. So that's something that I think ought to be represented at the level of the lexicon. Or, the fact that how many argument places a verb takes, that's something that's got to be represented in the lexicon. It's nothing to do with the kind of relationship is, the kick is, or the cut is, but it takes a certain number of relations. That's something to do with the way that we've decided to lexicoise those relations, and that's a privileged lexical feature. It may have nothing to do with the difference between these actual relations in the world. So there's a big, the debate about dancing. Dancing requires a place. You've got to be dancing in a specific place in order to be dancing. But that's not something that gets that's a world knowledge fact. It's not a lexical fact because it doesn't have any effect on the kind of thing you can put dancing in. Sorry, no, it's not. So then you had a second question about possessing the meaning. Possess the meaning of the OLS features. So you want to say that you can possess the meaning without having the OLS features.
Yeah,
otherwise you've got the meaning postulate kind of view.
Possess the meaning if you have the concept, right?
Yeah. So I think that's right. So I think I want to say that you can possess the meaning just by hooking up in the right way to the right kinds of content and having them lexicalized in the right kinds of ways. If you don't then know the OLS features, if you know I'm mistaken about the number of argument places that ready takes, then I'm going to make certain judgments about expressions, sentences containing the word ready that aren't going to be right from the point of view of a speaker of this particular language. So I don't want to separate concept possession from these meaning rules from concept content in the way that the meaning postulate view does. I think concept possession, straightforward kind of Bodorian picture, you've just got to get hooked up in the right kind of way. These are additional features that will come in with mastery of the language. Question. So what do I do about words that don't refer to natural kinds? I mean, I think this is the way in which I want to be this weak externalist, right? So the strong externalist is a really punchy view about the kinds of things there are in the world and the kinds of, contents we pick up to when we use one of these expressions. I'm not a punchy externalist in anything like that strong kind of way. I don't really know exactly what the externalist contents of these expressions are going to be. Natural kinds may have one kind of externalist content. Socially determined concepts may have a different kind of externally determined content. But the thought is that they're all world-evoking in this kind of way. Arthritis is an externally determined content, even though it's maybe not a natural kind. Arthritis is a natural kind. Some of our expressions are determined via our social relations. Money is a concept that hooks up to stuff in the world, even though surely money isn't picking out any natural kind, and it's determined, what counts as money is determined by the kinds of creatures we are and the kind of practices we do. So it's a weak externalist in that kind of way. Is that what was the last one? How do we learn the MLS features? Well, I guess just in the way that we learn our language, it's about exposure to certain kinds of features, so, well, I don't know actually. Okay, so then, I don't know is the answer. I haven't really decided whether I think that some of these features are innately acquired alongside some sort of Chomsky syntax, or whether they're things that you learn as you learn the language.
So you seem to make a distinction then between performance and competence, but also between competence and meaning, right? Because you can know the meaning without knowing, but still be really not competent. Competent.
Yeah, I think that might be right.
Because that's what I was wondering in Gabe's talk, because he was talking about competence all the time, but I was like, no, wait. Your minimalism makes a distinction between competence and meaning. So thanks.
Yeah, okay.
So I was thinking that it seems like your proposal for interpretation of indexicals and demonstratives and things seems really nice in the simple cases, I and that. But I was wondering what your theory says about something like a complex demonstrative, where it sort of looks like we need to do a bit of semantic stuff before we can work out what sort of singular thought we're going to have. At least the way that you set it up, it seemed very kind of linear, the nice kind of thing a computer scientist might draw. You've got your pre-semantics, then your semantics. This is all black box, and there's no intention reading going on. And then your post-semantics. But I was wondering whether it's something like, that big red ball. You might, in order to assign a singular thought, you might need to do some semantic processing and realize that whatever alpha is in this case, it had better be a big red ball. So are you okay with the kind of moving in and out here, or do you want to kind of something like the Dan Harris view, where you think we get a singular thought here, but it has some constraints on what it's going to be?
Yeah, and I guess a couple of points on that. So I don't like the sort of linear picture of modular processing. So this is a debate I've had with Nicholas Vincente quite often. He seems to think that it's modular, it's got to go 1, 2, 3, 4, get to the end. And the criticism needs to be made of Grice that, you've got to do all of your sentence meaning and then you can go off and do some implicature deduction. I don't think modularity has to be that kind of strict linear thing. So there may well be, I think what I take to be important to modularity is this kind of independence from other bodies of knowledge and having a kind of privileged stimuli that you're working on. Those are the things that I take to be important to modularity. So it may well be that there's a kind of kicking out of bits of content as you go along that then have to feed back into the pre-semantics. What I don't really want is the idea that is the kind of top-down effect stuff, so I don't want that to then be feeding back into your analysis of the semantic content. So as long as you don't get that, I think I'm kind of happy enough with it. I was going to say something else. Just remind me what the question is now, because now I'm answering it.
See how complex demonstratives.
Oh yeah, complex. Thank you very much. Excellent. So complex demonstratives, as Stefano pointed out, are things that we've had things to say about before. And my analysis of them was that you put that additional content into the character, so that, that lawyer has to be a lawyer. Doesn't figure in the content, all you get is the person, the actual object figuring in there, but if the person you're pointing at isn't a lawyer, then you've done something improper and you can't get a content there. And I think you definitely have to treat that content, the particular content, as semantically relevant, because you don't get the modal properties right if you don't let it in there. So then I think so then the question of whether you're getting this kind of kick back out of the semantics back to the determination of the intention or determination of the object is going to depend a little bit on exactly what role you're assigning to these things and exactly what the character is part of the pre-semantics or part of the actual semantics. I'm not sure I have a well-formed answer to that at the moment. But I guess the last thing I want to say is that I want to treat singular concepts as themselves things that come with both character and content. So the content is always going to be exhausted by the object, but I think that you have different kinds of characters depending on the linguistic devices that have introduced them. So I think you get different singular concepts if you've introduced that or this, but I think you might also get different singular concepts if you've introduced that F versus that G. So you get some kind of shaping about the concepts themselves. But I think much more.
Thanks a lot. I guess that in your response to the objections you've considered, it's quite fundamental, this tripartition between pre-semantics, genuinely semantics, and post-semantics. And I thought I had quite clear what kind of things would correspond to these three levels, until in his comments, Stefano said something about how he would put connotation in the character, so that would be more like the pre-semantics, and that confused me a lot. I mean, I look forward to hearing about that, but then I consider the hypothesis that I am not very clear about what you would mean to put in this different levels, and then I thought just of asking
Sure.
a concrete example.
I mean, I've actually thought about the idea that you put Freudian sentences into the pre-semantics. I guess I would think about that. But it was really focusing on a demonstrative case, what gets into the pre-semantics. The actual act of determining what object appears in the context and the place at which. So if you think of the context as a sequence of, it's got a demonstrative. You want a sequence of speaker, time, place, world, object. How do we know what object figures in that kind of Kaplanian context if we're thinking of context as Kaplanian? That's a pre-semantic question, right? Why it's the paper versus the table that figures in this particular context that I'm going to use for interpreting this utterance is something to do with the speaker intentions. It's about whether they intended to refer to the paper or the table. So getting your context fixed, all pre-semantic, then doing your semantics, working out what the content of this utterance was relativized to this context, this sentence was relativized to this context, that's then the semantics. So all of that stuff about how I got the table versus the paper completely dropped out of the picture by the time that the semantic theory kicks in. Yeah.
And then I was curious about how, whether you think that this tripartition corresponds or not to psychological realities, and if there are ways to, because I can think of ways to disentangle the first two as a block from the third, but not really. I was wondering how you would, what kind of studies can disentangle the very first one from the second?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that there would be a specific study that would tell you for any given case. I think it is part of adopting a bigger picture about the nature of the mind and then seeing what evidence you can find for that being the right account of the picture of the mind. So I definitely have a psychologically oriented version of minimalism. So you could be a minimalist and not care about the mechanisms of psychological processing. So that's compelling number 4, I think, are really concerned about. Not concerned about these questions anyway, but the questions they are concerned about. Whereas I definitely think that one of the really good reasons for being a minimalist is that we've got some reasons to think that language processing is modular, and we've got some reasons to think that it's modular right up to the level of semantic content, right up to the level of something truth or valuable. And if we've got some reasons to think that, then we need a kind of semantic theory that will fit within that sort of structure. And I think minimalism is a very good candidate for being that kind of theory. So the sorts of studies that would help you here would be studies about supporting that idea that you've got a modular language faculty and it runs all the way to true conditional content. And then, if you think you've got a module, then you think you've got something that does something broadly speaking computational, and you know that that's not going to be intention recovery. So that's going to give you a kind of indirect empirical evidence for the idea that the pre-semantic stuff is the intention sensitive stuff. So I think it's not going to be the sort of thing that I could go and do a nice M-Turk experiment on that's going to pull these things apart for me, but maybe at the big picture level you find more.
Just a word on Stefano. I did not understand very clearly when you say that things like pointing or place shape the context. Yes, what does it mean to shape the context, if not to fill the parameter of the context?
That's right, yeah.
Yep. That.
Yeah. Right. I do things that make it apparent that the intended context is one in which a particular object plays a particular role.
Therefore, demonstrations are just the main tool to fix.
If demonstrations are the point, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to directing intentions. But that's tough. Yeah.
Strict time.
Well, well,
Strict time.
well, okay. Everybody can.